Hi everyone, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for our fourth installment of the Justice and Injustice panel. I'm Teresa Haar, the Special Assistant and Attorney General, and I'll be moderating today's panel. And while we usually meet on Sundays, this week we're meeting on a Saturday because tomorrow is Father's Day. And so with that, happy early Father's Day to everyone. This week's Justice and Injustice panel focuses on law enforcement associations. It's a discussion by professional organizations representing law enforcement officers and executives on how we can improve policing. We have with us today Attorney General Erin Ford. He is Nevada's 34th Attorney General and the first African American to take statewide constitutional office. During his time as a legislator, he passed several bills relating to criminal justice and reform. In his role as Attorney General, he believes there is no greater task than the pursuit of justice and has adopted the office-wide motto of "Our job is justice." Joining Attorney General Ford, we have Regina Coward-Holman, President of the Nevada Black Police Association and Region 1 President of the National Black Police Association. We also have Rick McCann, Executive Director of the Nevada Association of Public Safety Officers. We have Matt Kaplan, President of the Nevada Police Union, Jose Hernandez of the Latino Officers Association, Steve Grammis, President of the Las Vegas Police Protective Association, and Eric Spratley, Executive Director of the Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs Association. So at this time, I'm going to be asking the panelists a series of questions, including questions received by the media and by members of the public. These questions are designed to facilitate a conversation on these very important topics. They'll be posed to the entire group, and I encourage everyone to respond to as many questions as you'd like. And starting off, the organizations that each of you are with serves a unique role in the interplay between law enforcement agencies. And so I would like each of you, we'll go through one by one, to describe your organization, who its members are generally, and what your organization's objectives are. And so, Regina, if we could start with you. Sorry, Regina, you're still muted.
All right, I have to get that right. Sorry about that. So, our association is a national association, and we have a Nevada chapter. We were founded in 1972. Our members are law enforcement employees. We do have some civilians as well as commission, and we have a few community members who are part of our association as well. And our main goal is to be the conscience of the criminal justice system, which means we interact with as laws are being formed, and we have our voice in that, but also to bridge the gap between the police and the community. That is our big thing, to make sure that the police and the community can live and coexist as one family, if you will.
Thank you. Rick McCann?
Good afternoon. The Nevada Association of Public Safety Officers, NAPSO, we're the largest compilation of state AFL-CIO affiliated law enforcement groups in Nevada. We represent about 1,500 members in 18 different law enforcement associations around the state, including police officers, sheriff's deputies, corrections officers, adult and juvenile probation officers, enforcement investigators, et cetera. NAPSO is an umbrella organization basically providing consultation, guidance, and representation to our groups for their disciplinary matters, contract negotiations when asked, and we lobby on behalf of law enforcement groups throughout the state.
Thank you. Matt Kaplan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Kaplan. I'm with the Nevada Police Union. We represent over 500 state-level Category 1 peace officers in the state of Nevada. We're the only union that represents the Unit G, which is all those people, and it includes state park rangers, game wardens, state troopers, university police officers, state marshals, and also parole probation officers statewide. So our goals are to represent our members in matters relating to benefits, wages, and other issues, and lobby for them and during the legislative session to represent their interests.
Thank you. Jose Hernandez.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jose Hernandez. Thank you so very much for the invite. I am the president of the National Latino Peace Officers Association, Clarke County chapter. Of course, we belong to a much larger organization, a national organization. Again, I am the local chapter president here in Clarke County. We represent the majority of our members are members of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. We are an association. We are not part of the collective bargaining. However, our goals and objectives are to, as Regina was stating, our goals are to bridge the gap between law enforcement and our Latino community. We understand that we have a long way to go. There's a lot of work that we have to do in order to gain the confidence of our Latino communities. And so that's our main goal, is to utilize our resources to be able to establish strong relationships within the community and to represent our members with whatever issues they may have regarding their profession. But mainly, again, it's through community efforts to strengthen these relationships.
Great, thank you. And Eric Spratley.
Thank you so much. So I'm Eric Spratley, Executive Director of Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs, and the Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs Association was formed in 1953 as a professional, social, nonprofit association dedicated to the cooperation and understanding of all law enforcement agencies in the state of Nevada in order to provide law enforcement services of the highest professional quality to the citizens of the state of Nevada. The association was formed to encourage charitable and educational interests, as well as compassionate and equitable public service for public safety. Now I'm reading that statement because that's what's on our website, nbsca.com. It's our mission, it's our goal that I just stated. The association is comprised of 17 elected sheriffs in Nevada, so all the Nevada sheriffs, and around 40 appointed chiefs of police throughout the state, as well as a large number of law enforcement agency executives and leaders from a wide variety of state, local, tribal, and even some federal partners. In total, we have about 150 members in the association, and these are the decision makers and policy makers for Nevada law enforcement. And I did want to clarify, contrary to the belief that legislature and some state offices, the NBSCA is not the rurals, in that we only represent the voice and opinions of rural agencies. Our membership includes all agencies, large and small, north, south, east, and west, and all have an equal voice and fellowship in the association.
Great, thank you. And as we've seen over the past couple of weeks, one of the biggest recommendations in improving law enforcement agencies across the country is to promote diversity in the hiring process and to ensure that your police department is representative of the community that it serves. And so I would pose to each of you, what hiring practices would you recommend an agency to utilize in order to foster diversity in recruitment and hiring? And what can your organization do to better promote diversity in recruitment and hiring?
I'll take that one. Eric Spratley, Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs. I made some notes on that. The goal of law enforcement agencies is to recruit, to retain. We want career professionals. We want 25, 30-year law enforcement professionals. And so the way to do that is the way that our agencies are doing it in Nevada, and they're going out and participating in job or recruitment events regionally in their area. And the main thing we want to do is we want to, throughout all agencies in Nevada, reduce biases and stereotypes that deter from effective management of people, right? We want to change behaviors and cultures within law enforcement to help effectively manage a diverse workforce. To do that, we need to train our leaders. Our leaders need to be properly aware of the social things going on. And we do that at our annual conference for our sheriffs and chiefs every year. We partner with the FBI National Academy. So we're getting great leaders, up and coming leaders in these organizations across the board. Last year, we trained heavily on officer wellness, mental wellness, especially following the year prior, the October 1 event in Las Vegas. But this year, we were focusing on rebuilding due to the COVID pandemic, but we've pivoted. And so we have speakers coming in to talk about, we already had speakers regarding implicit bias, constitutional policing, police legitimacy, and things like that. So it's very important that we train our leaders, because they're going to set the tone and the policies and the direction for the agencies that all these other organizations are going to follow.
Great, thank you. Ms. Coward-Holman?
I do agree with his comments. I think that he's training our leaders is very important. I would also like to see the practice of a standardized process. And I can speak for my former agency, which is Las Vegas Metro Police Department. We have some issues there. It's not a secret. We know, we've talked to the sheriff, we've talked to the upper management, and we've made some strides, but we have a very long way to go. And what I would also like to see, I would like to see a more diverse group. A lot of agencies fail to put people of diversified backgrounds in these positions. And that is why two people can have done the same exact thing, and two different people have a different opinion. But when there's a difference of opinion, when they're so far off skew, there has to be leadership to step in the middle of that and say, hey, let's take a second look at this, because we've experienced that time and time again. And if the background process and recruiting process is not diversified, it doesn't work. If you are trying to recruit African Americans, you need African Americans to go there. I'm not saying that people of other descendants cannot. People normally identify better with people who look alike, who look like them. If you're trying to recruit women, you send women to a place where women are going to be, because women then more likely will click with each other. But my main point is this. We know that we have, as our association, we get a lot of African Americans to the testing process. We get a lot of African Americans to the background process, and they fall short in the background process. And why is that? Again, from lack of leadership, number one. Number two, the unstandardized process, which means that we are making exceptions for people because of either they're related, because they're friends, and those are things that we can get better at. We want things standardized. The sheriff has been made aware of this, and his staff knows this, and these are some things that we're working with him. We're holding them accountable to make sure that policing and the background process is level.
Thank you. Mr. Kaplan?
And thank you. And I have to agree with many of the comments that are already made. And to add to those, I think that it is a problem. I look around at the people I work with, and currently right now, there's not a single Black trooper working in Northern Nevada. And the start of all this, I think, starts with our political leadership. They have to put forward the leadership and insist upon taking the necessary actions to have a diverse workforce that reflects the communities we serve. Having said that, though, especially in the state level, with us being 25 to 35% paid less than the local municipalities and sheriff's departments, it is a very difficult thing to recruit a diverse workforce. So with that comes a necessity to properly fund the state level agencies to not only pay officers a living wage, but also to provide training and recruitment opportunities that allow our department managers to effectively go out and recruit those people from other ethnicities that we want to have in our departments representing our agencies.
Great, thank you. Mr. Hernandez? Yep, Mr. Hernandez.
You know, I think everyone makes some extremely valuable points. You know, it's in terms of recruiting, I think we're certainly not there yet. And I think I'm going to speak from personal experience because I'm a bit biased in this subject as I was the sergeant in charge of recruiting for Las Vegas Metro Police. And I can tell you that we did some phenomenal work in increasing the diversity of our agency. Not to say that the agency was not diverse already. I think we're fortunate that we work for such a diverse agency, but there's always work that needs to be done. And so one of the things that we did that Ms. Regina mentioned was seminars specifically geared for instance, to women. I was extremely surprised at just how many women were interested in law enforcement. They just didn't know where to begin. And so being able to put together seminars to educate them and show them how to begin the process. And it sounds like a very simple task. Just apply to be a police officer. That's all you have to do. But there's a lot more to it, because there's questions that come up that me as a male, I could never answer some of the concerns of female candidates. So being able to have specific groups of people that can share their experiences, their personal experiences, and therefore being able to attract and introduce them into the law enforcement profession. We did the same thing for various other demographics, and having, I think by far, a diverse and robust recruiting team is key, because people looking to hire onto an agency want to see what that agency represents. What does it look like? And so when you go to a recruitment fair and they get to see your team and they see who's part of your team, that's a small picture of what your agency looks like. And so having a robust team, a diverse team that can go out and can share those different experiences, that's how we make the impact. That's how we start to recruit from within, or recruit and identify those candidates from all over. They're out there. We just have to put in the work to be able to find them.
Great, thank you. And General Ford, did I see your hand up? Nope, okay. There's also been a lot of discussion on moving towards a more community-based policing approach. And one way this can be facilitated would be to create opportunities for patrol officers to regularly interact with their neighborhood residents, with local faith leaders and business leaders in their community. And so what can your organizations do to facilitate those efforts? And what have you already started doing to facilitate those efforts?
I'll go, Eric Spratley.
Thanks, Eric.
So I want to put this term in your guys' head. It's called constitutional policing. It's not different than community policing. In fact, it's the other side of the same coin. And I'm just going to read off a website. It says constitutional and community policing go hand in hand. Departments that promote a culture of constitutional policing emphasize their responsibility and loyalty to the citizens in the community. These agencies invest in the community and encourage officers to build relationships with community members. So it's not the same as community policing. Constitutional policing focuses on ensuring fair, legal, constitutional treatment of citizens, while community policing takes constitutional policing a step further by adapting the police work to the specific needs of the community. So the Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs Association, at our annual conference, we have a guy named Eric Daigle coming. He's a phenomenal attorney, and he teaches on constitutional policing and a whole litany of other things, use of force, implicit bias, all those things. We already have him coming. Like I said, it's about training up our leadership in what makes sense for their community, and then pushing that down to the line staff. So that's the step we're taking. We will have that training in November at our annual conference.
Great, thank you. Mr. McCann?
Thanks. As part of the Nevada State AFL-CIO and our parent union, Communications Workers of America, CWA, we have opportunities, as many do on this panel, to interact with labor and business leaders across the state and across the country on issues affecting their working lives. Guess what we're dealing with now? Police reform. It affects their daily working lives. That's why we're happy to be a part of this discussion. I'm also proud to say that NAPSO maintains a seat on the National CWA Civil Rights and Equity Commission, CR&E. We meet with representatives across our Western region in CWA on these very issues. I'm proud to say also that a few years ago, we started kind of a mantra that we keep talking about around us. And the mantra is, quote, don't talk about us, talk to us. Meaning stop sitting around talking about cops. Stop talking about the Spratleys and the Kaplans and the Gramises and the Hernandezes. Stop talking about those guys. Those guys are the heroes out on the road. I'm not. I represent them, but I'm not a cop. So let's talk to these people who are experts in that area instead of talking about them. And now we're often part of the discussion, as we are here today, and we want movements to be able to talk to us, not sit around and talk about us. And I think that's how we offer something to this entire process, is to want to get involved. If you want to get involved, now more than ever, you'll have a seat at the table, I think, and I'm pleased about that.
Very good, thank you. And Ms. Coward-Holman?
Community policing is a very strong point that the Nevada Black Police Association that we do. We are partners with Metro, especially with Bolden Area Command. That's where I spent my last 6 years. And we were really able to dive into that community and change the climate, if you will. Community policing is the wave of the future. We can no longer arrest our way into having a safer community. It's not going to happen. When we, as the associations, get out and partner with the police, we change a whole paradigm of their thought process, of educating them to do better, and we show them this. While we were able to partner with Bolden Area Command, and we brought programs to the community, and we did one of our biggest things out forever. I mean, I can never just say how this changed us a lot. We took our Metro helicopter and we put Santa inside of a helicopter, and we brought our helicopter with Santa down to Doolittle Field. That community is used to seeing the helicopter coming around looking for a suspect. But what a change in the mind shift when you can take that same helicopter, put a Santa who's Black, who identifies like they do, and bring him down to Doolittle Field, and he had toys for the kids. That was huge, because what we did again, that showed the community that, hey, they knew our faces as being police. But now we shifted to a whole different direction to put that police and that Santa uniform together and bring that helicopter and land that on the field. That had never happened in that area. And what a great shift that was. We were also able to make farmers market and bring farmers market to Bolden Area Command as a partnership, and to put farmers market in the parking lot and give that community free food. That's a hit, because again, we're doing things that police do not normally do. And I remind you that there's a million and one things that we can do as police, but we have to know, are they effective? One of our things, we reached out to George Wallace as the Black Police and Bolden Area Command as a partnership. We do everything in a partnership because that's the only thing that's going to work. We can no longer work as one single, a solid group. It doesn't work. Partnership is where it is. And we reached out to George Wallace. We said, hey, we need you to come into this community. Our community is hurting. We need to reach out and get our community together and have a night of jokes. You know, everyone loves to laugh. There's never a bad time to laugh when everybody's together having a great time. We reached out to George Wallace, and we were able to get 1,500 people to come into the Texas for a free night of laughter. And not only did that spark a conversation, but Sheriff Gillespie was a sheriff at the time. To see him up on the stage, he says, I'm only going to stay for 30 minutes. Well, guess what? The sheriff stayed for the whole time. And we had local people from the radio stations come in. But if you use community policing and you start putting these events and you start educating people, it's definitely going to turn the tide of how the community, how they view us. Because now they see that it's being transparent. We open relationship. We tear down walls. You have to do things outside of the box that regular policing will not do. Community policing will save every police department if it's used effectively. My opinion is this: when you work in community policing, you will have a different way that you respond to the public. When people do things that we know that they should not be doing, we have a kinder, gentler approach because we are more community oriented. And our approach, a lot of times, will de-escalate whatever's going on because we do it differently. And I think that community policing departments will really embrace that and fund it. Our police departments will just spark and just leapfrog into a whole other dimension if the police can really get that and grab it and make it work. We've been very good with that, but it's something that we can always use and use more effectively and use more of.
Great, thank you. And General Ford?
Thank you. Regina, I really appreciate your comments, and Eric and Rick, thank you so much, because what I'm about to say kind of encapsulates a little bit of what you talked about already. By the time this is over, folks hopefully will know my 5 C's. Started with 3. I have 5 now in my office that we operate under. Beginning of my tenure, I talked about the C of consumer protection, the C of protecting constitutional rights, the C of criminal justice and criminal justice reform. And then I've added 2 new C's at my State of Justice Award, State of Justice speech I gave in January, where I said community engagement is a key component of what we have to do, in addition to obviously client services. These things were already taking place, but these are areas of focus that I've had in my office. Overarching all of those 3 C's, specifically the community engagement perspective, is what I call the 3 types of communities that exist out there. And I've said this before, but it bears repeating. You have communities out there that have utmost faith and confidence in law enforcement. You've seen it on TV before, where if it's a cop who is testifying on a stand, whatever he says is Bible, and the jury is going to believe everything that he or she says, and anybody who says something different is lying. That's one level of trust that exists in certain communities out there. There's a level of trust in communities, certain communities, where it was way up there, but it's diminished a little bit because of maybe a personal interaction that they've had with law enforcement, or maybe vicariously they've seen something bad happen, but they still have an overall sense of belief in law enforcement. Then you have a third type of community, frankly, the type that I came from when I grew up, that doesn't have much trust, if any at all, in law enforcement. And it wasn't so much because we didn't like them coming to our neighborhoods when bad stuff was happening. It was because sometimes bad stuff happened when they came into our neighborhoods. And so what I've said to my officers, to my investigators, to my entire office, is that it's incumbent upon us through community engagement and other ways to augment trust where it already exists, to restore trust where it's been diminished, and then to create it where it's never existed in the first place. And the best way to do that is through interacting with them, and as Eric says, a constitutional way. For example, racial profiling is unconstitutional. And so to the extent we are able to ensure that we are eradicating racial profiling from our interactions with people, then that can help that can help them to have better relations with us. And by the way, these types of communities, the community that doesn't trust the government so much, isn't just in the hood, so to speak. Go out to the rurals and ask them what they think about the government trying to take their guns. They have a level of concern with government as well when it comes to some of the things that we interact with. So this isn't just some demographic issue. This is a community-based issue that needs to be addressed. And so some of the things that you're talking about, Regina, for example, about going out there and making yourself present, making yourself known, letting them know I shop at the Smiths right down the street just like you do, and that I'm a neighbor, and that I work with, that I live in the same neighborhood. I think those are very important components to improving the relationships between law enforcement and the communities that they serve.
Thank you. As we learned last week, a number of law enforcement agencies in the state have really good policies in place. For example, requiring an officer to intervene if they're witnessing a fellow officer engage in wrongdoing or using excessive force. But one of the biggest barricades to any successful implementation of a good policy is actually department culture. So what can your organizations do to create a department-wide culture where officers can take those affirmative steps without fearing reprisal from fellow officers?
I don't want to be the guy that always jumps in first, but I'll go if there's no other folks. So it's just going to come down to what I've been saying all along. Train leaders, train line staff, line personnel, train recruits, and train often. One of the things that happens when there's budget shortfalls, the first thing to go in any law enforcement or government agency actually is training. They say, no, let training go. We don't need that. We need this. And that's a detriment to the behavior of especially cops. So as a cop, we're out there consoling a mother whose baby is laying dead in the driveway. That's the kind of calls that cops go on. We're directing traffic in 112-degree heat because a candidate for something special is coming through. And we got people yelling at us, and it's hot and it's frustrating. We deal with just sometimes horrific things that you can't even talk about or imagine, right? And it builds a hard heart in an officer. And the way to combat that is to continually remind them that the people you are dealing with is not us versus them. It's people, it's human beings. And people make mistakes, and some of them need to go to jail, and some of them need force used on them, and things like that, right? But they're continually reminding people, continually reminding cops that These are human beings. So this is diversity training, ethics training, implicit bias training, all of the buzzwords, but it's continually training our people and reminding them and softening that heart, tearing down those walls, and making them realize that they're dealing with human beings on an hourly basis at their job. Fund training. Fund Nevada Post. Nevada Post is funded with a shoestring budget, in my opinion. They need to be overfunded because these mandates come down from the legislature. We need you to train on this and this and this and this and this, 12 hours. Oh, but it's not 12 hours together because then it's going to get muddy. We want 4 hours of this and 4 hours. They can't do it. They can't put it out. Offices can't do consistent training. So if you fund Nevada Post, and for the legislators that are watching, consider that when you're considering your reforms in the next couple of weeks. You need to adequately fund the standards and training arm of Nevada, and that's Nevada Post. And then they can create consistent programs to train our leaders, our line staff, our recruits, and have continuing training ongoing.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Grammas?
Yeah,
So
I think
I'm
I'm
gonna
sorry.
disagree
Sorry,
a little
please.
with. Oh, can you hear me? Good. I'm going to disagree a little with Eric. The issue is not money for training; it's time for training. Our officers log on, they come to work, they have training days, and they don't get a training day. Calls for service are stacked up. Bodies got to be on the road. People are off sick. People are on vacation, and they can't train. Regina knows that. Jose knows that. Matt knows that. We've all come from a time, Regina, Jose, and myself, been here 22 years. We used to train a lot. Every other week was your training day. And we'd get out there and whether it was de-escalation training now, defensive tactics, the range, how to handle people, how to talk to people, how to interact with people. We've lost that. And one thing that would be great to come out of the legislative session is mandating training time for officers. We get an academy block of instruction that is amazing. LVMPD is probably second to none in the country. However, when you do that 10 years ago and they say, well, you've been trained, no, muscle memory, repetitive training is what it takes. You can have someone learn a move now and in 5 years say, do that same move, and they're not going to know it because they didn't apply it, they didn't practice it. So when we look at this legislative cycle, we need to look at an ability to keep training, whether it's on how to interact with the community, positive interactions, right? Me as the union president for LVMPD, I drive around often and I'll wave at cops and they won't wave back. That's problematic. You know, when I was a kid, I'd wave at a cop, he'd stop, wave, how you doing, young man? It doesn't happen anymore. And so we tell our cops, hey, start engaging differently. If the only time we come into a community is to take someone to jail, there's a problem. We need to stop in there. And I think we've all seen on our Facebook page with Metro, the young officer dancing. Now, he can't dance to save his life. Horrible dancer. Whoever's giving him tips needs to stop. But it's interaction on a different scale with people to show, hey, we're human too. We know you're human too. And yeah, we're not like firemen where we have, you know, nice calendars. We're not in good shape like firemen. They get to work out all the time. But we can still walk into a community and talk to people, shake a hand, give them a sticker, talk to them about things they're interested in, not just crime and punishment and that, but things they like doing, whether it's youth sports or whatever, how their family life is, how school is. We don't harp on school enough either, I don't think. We need to educate our young kids. And I won't say our education system fails, but you look at a classroom with 50 kids in a classroom, how can a teacher effectively get through to a student? And you can understand why a kid goes, you know what, I get no interaction from my teacher. I'm just going to zone out. And that will lead to problems down the road. So when we look at what we need training-wise, time. We need time. We need to be able to go back to once every couple weeks mandating you have the bodies to go work the roads. Let them get some training time in and good quality training time. Now to support Eric, have a standard for saying, hey, we're going to train everybody the same. I know departments across the state don't do what Metro does. And again, I harp on Metro because I think we're the best out there. But not everybody gets the same training. Make it standardized. Take that lesson plan and make it statewide and say, this is what you're all going to do on your training times, and not just look at a computer and do some roll call training. We're going to do some real training. But I think we got to have time to do it rather than every other week they want to train. Nope, you got to go out and handle calls. So that's my 2 cents.
And I think that's a really great segue into my next question. There's been a lot of discussion on training on officer intervention or training on de-escalation. So what kinds of training should law enforcement agencies make a priority in order to better facilitate the goal of serving and protecting their own communities? Mr. McCann?
Yeah, briefly, I mean, obviously I'm not the cop in the room, so the training is going to have to come more from them. But from my perspective, training is great. We're all for training. I think Steve just said it as well. Training, training, training. You got to have the time, of course, to do it. But don't just give the agencies unfunded mandates. Don't tell them you got to come up with these following things here and figure out how to pay for it. That's not going to get it done. So I think when we're looking at federal legislation, when we're looking at state legislation, which I'm sure is about to hit us, find a way to fund it, both on the local level as well as the state level. Training on racial profiling, religious profiling, implicit bias. These are all, I think, incredibly important topics to train on. I don't think anybody here is going to disagree with that. Let's see, as Steve just said, let's see training be consistent throughout the state and throughout the country. We don't have a big state in terms of the population, but there's a lot of differences in terms of how these groups are being trained. Many times it's because of funding, many times just because of philosophy, many times just because of the community. That's going to have to be brought to bear as well.
Great, thank you. Mr. Hernandez?
No, I agree with everyone. I think training is absolutely our bread and butter, for lack of a better word. I mean, that's what makes or breaks an agency. And whether we're talking about duty to intervene or we're talking about training that encompasses de-escalation, de-escalation, by itself, it's one of those areas that absolutely needs to be looked at. For agencies that maybe haven't considered what a de-escalation plan looks like, look to agencies that have maybe already experienced some hardships and have developed good training when it comes to de-escalation. I think we're fortunate, as Steve said, we belong to an agency who does provide us with some outstanding training. But what is de-escalation? What does that encompass? It can be such a broad subject if we don't discuss exactly what it is that it entails. So does de-escalation mean that you're going to be kind to people to the point where you endanger your own life? Are you going to ask someone to do something a million times before you take action? Or does de-escalation mean that you start with a certain approach and then you start to use other options to accomplish your mission? You're not coming in and at a level 10 and then trying to come down to level 1. Do we start slowly trying to engage and understand what someone is going through, whether it's a crisis, they're experiencing a mental crisis, or just a crisis in general, and we learn to identify those things. So I think de-escalation is important to be able to identify what people are experiencing when we first make contact with them, and then determine what the best course of action is going to be. That can be a form of de-escalation, slowing down the momentum, understanding what you're going to be responding to, what are the details of my call, and what are the resources that I'm going to need to best address the situation. Again, all those things are very much part of training, and how often you're able to train, and how often you're going to be able to do this, to become proficient and become a subject matter expert in that area. Training is absolutely one of the key things in any agency.
Thank you. And Ms. Howard-Holman, did I see your hand up?
Yes. I'm going to go back and say training is key, but perception in training is a whole different spin. I remember taking a class that we took, and in that class that we took, we talk about de-escalation, but de-escalation comes with your perception. I see things totally different than all the men that are on this panel, believe me. Very different because of who I am, where I come from, and I have a different look at things. We have to learn how to meet people where they are, if you will. We have to see people for who they are. Training It's done, and it needs to be consistent. But we also have to remember what training is this. I took a class that was called sensitivity awareness. Steve, you've been on long enough. I'm sure you probably remember that class that we took. And we thought for a minute, this is the stupidest class ever. Who wants to take sensitivity awareness? That class today, I assure you, it's been 20 years ago when we took that class. It would have saved us a whole lot of money, because what we thought was totally useless back there for that class is very apparent now. That sensitivity awareness makes us see things different, and it makes us speak to the current tide of what's going on. And had we kept that training going, I assure you that police departments would have leaped a lot further than where we are. And by us not adopting that policy, it's caused us to slow down and to take steps backwards.
Mr. Grammas?
Also getting some training on the cultures that we're dealing with, right? Like, I know there are cultures out there that, right, wrong, or indifferent, when you walk in the door, you're not expected to talk to the wife because the husband is the domineering person in the culture, or taking your shoes off when you walk in the door. We have to be opened up to the communities to say, hey, here are things that when you come to our home that we do, that we is part of our life, and that we expect some give take on, not just always, how do we take someone into custody? Kind of to Regina's point, listen, it's a different day and age, right? My father was a police officer, God rest his soul, but he was an officer back in the 70s in New York, the 80s out here, in the 90s. Police work is not the same. It's not, you're going to do what I tell you and that's it. You have no say. People have a right to ask, why am I being stopped? And officers have to know that it's okay to tell them exactly why. Some people maybe still feel a little too macho to say, well, I'm the cop, you're just going to do what I say. No, it's okay. I'm a bigger guy. I've always been a big guy in my career, but I hardly ever got in any fights because I could talk very well. And I could get people to kind of comply and get into a position that is more advantageous to us. Plus, fighting with people just really sucks as you get old. It hurts your body. It's no fun. No one looks good when they're in a fight. But using the verbal skills and being able to identify who you're dealing with, what their background's like, where they come from, I think that's some of the training, too, that when we talk about that training, it's not always how do we stop a car, but when we stop the car, how do we talk to the occupant inside it who may be wondering why you're stopping?
And do you think each of your organizations would support bringing back these training on these kind of soft skills like sensitivity training, or training on specifically how to respond to particular groups of people, be it training on responding to someone who may be deaf or autistic, or someone who is in a state of mental or emotional distress? Do you think that your organizations would support a statewide training on those kinds of topics? Mr. Grammas, we'll start with you.
I'll tell you, if they're not, they shouldn't be leading their organizations. If they're not willing to step up and say, hey, we have to recognize this stuff, and they're not willing to implement it, which I highly doubt across the state, but if they're not, this isn't the place in the day and age for them in policing anymore, in my opinion.
Mr. Kaplan?
Yes, thank you. I know that in the state level and us as a union, we absolutely support these kinds of things. But I want to go back, if you can embellish me for a moment. And I feel it's necessary for me to make one point that's really clear, that we have a problem on the state level that I think maybe some local agencies don't have as much. And I want to say a big amen to what everyone else is saying regarding the importance of training, the types of training. I know, representing my members, we all want more training, but we don't want the check the box kind of training, where you just sit down for half an hour, look at a PowerPoint and say you took some training. We want quality training that'll help us be better, to push forward the standards. We have no problem with that. We think we're doing good as state level peace officers, but we acknowledge we can do better, and training is that key part. However, it needs to be good training, but also with us, for example, we have a humongous practical problem with staffing levels in the state. So even if we all get on the same page and say that we need to train and be the training like firefighters do, where you're spending time every day developing your skills and keeping your skills honed. The other day we had one trooper working in Reno. Now, when you have one person working in Reno and one in Carson and maybe a sergeant somewhere, there's just not the ability to pull guys off the road and provide quality training and practice for officers to engage in. So although I agree with everything 100% and want to push the bar forward and expectations for us in law enforcement in regards to our ability and need to train, there's a practical lower level to this, at least at the state level. We need to be properly funded so that we can have not only the training, but have full staffing so that we can take guys off the road and have time for them to work in training, while there's others who are handling calls for service that are necessary to provide public safety services.
Great, thank you. In furtherance of the goal of transparency and accountability, there is new proposed federal legislation, the Justice and Policing Act of 2020, that would require state and local law enforcement agencies to provide data on law enforcement practices, their use of force statistics, and demographic information of civilians who have had law enforcement contact. One of the other proposals would be the establishment of a national police misconduct registry, which would catalog all law enforcement discipline nationwide. Would each of your organizations support these new proposed requirements?
I'm going to say the Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs absolutely would support that because we don't like hiring bad cops, plain and simple. We don't want just a warm body out there filling a patrol car or working in the jail just to have that position filled. We want quality, as I said before, career personnel in our organization. But it's got to be based on validated due process finding of misconduct. It can't be stuff that isn't true and valid about the person.
Thank you. Ms. Coward-Holman?
We are actually very happy to see that to come on board. We've said that for years, that there needs to be some type of registry to keep up with officers who do have bad behavior in departments. And then they move, they are either fired or they resign because it doesn't look like they were terminated. They are afforded the opportunity to resign. And what happened, they take that same bad practice, they come to another department who's doing good and thriving, and they tank that department. And it's like a continuous cycle where they're fired from these departments and they jump to another department, and the bad behaviors continue. So we are extremely happy to see that come aboard, and we definitely support that 110%. We're glad to see that enacted.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Grammis?
I think an easier model is something that kind of still goes on, but not a lot of people, maybe smaller departments don't adhere to it, is the practice of any law enforcement organization in the country. If you're hiring anybody that has prior law enforcement experience, you should be mandated to have them agree to have their file turned over to you. What happens, I know our department does that. If you come here, you've got to sign a waiver that says, I am allowing you to look at my entire personnel record for my previous department. Conducting a central repository always has issues with saying, well, is everything submitted properly? It's better to put a rule in place that says anytime anyone goes to hire someone with previous experience, that's the mandate. They have to agree to turn that thing over. And if they don't, then don't hire them on the spot. But at least it probably takes a little bit off of trying to make a central repository, as opposed to just putting the onus on all the departments. When you hire previous experience, you have to get that documentation of their entire personnel file.
Thank you. And Mr. McCann?
Yeah, I was going to say almost the same thing that Steve just said. I mean, the purpose of this, as I understand it, is to try to find bad cops. Well, who's looking? Probably who's looking, or should be looking, absolutely should be looking, are the new prospective employers. Background checks are necessary, and they're not always done well, if they're done at all. I'm concerned about an overutilization of a national registry, not unlike what Eric just said. Let's make it at least substantive stuff. Let's make it use of force type of issues. That's what we're here about. We're not here to talk about somebody who was late for work. And most assuredly, when due process has been exhausted, not just a complaint that may have wandered through the system and could potentially on a national basis plague that officer. If somebody wants to know the kind of officer they're about to hire or thinking about hiring, damn it, they got to do the proper background check, do the due diligence. Otherwise, they're at fault as much as anyone.
Thank you. General Ford?
Yeah, thanks. So I've heard a lot of enlightening conversation over the last few questions, and I want to offer some follow-up questions and some tough pushback, because I know what people are watching right now are saying, for example, in response to some of this. The training, I appreciate what you're saying on that point, and I understand the importance of time off, time to train, and money for the training, and the substance of the training. Talk about actual ramifications, though, when assuming you've had that training and someone violates the training. There's a difficulty, as I understand it. At least this is what's the common understanding of actually being able to discipline and to appropriately get rid of certain folks if they violate policy and after they've been trained. And similar to that is this duty to intervene that some stations are, some Metro has, for example, and that Reno is going to be putting into place pretty soon. What are the ramifications for failing to intervene, and how do you address that? It's less the policies, as I understand it, from folks who talk to us about this, and more about the implementation of the policies and the discipline associated with violating those policies that has helped to cause a problem in the trust in our particular relationships here. And the third thing I want to say is this. Mr. McCann, someone's going to say, why shouldn't a complaint be part of this repository? If I get charged with something, as I did when I was 18 years old for public intoxication, it still comes up. It came up when I ran for office. It's something that follows me forever, and I have to contend with it. I have to answer the question about it, and I have to convince other folks that was something that happened that was not something that should be used against me in the context of what it is that I'm doing. Why shouldn't that be the case when it comes to even complaints that are being filed against officers? Just questions I want to throw out for consideration, because I know the public is asking those questions.
And to segue off of that, in direct contrast to a national registry for law enforcement misconduct, many police unions nationwide have a contractual provision between the union and the law enforcement agency that actually allows for the expungement of an officer's disciplinary records after a certain limited period of time. Mr. Gramis, I'm going to call you out on that one for LVPPA because I know that's a term of your agreement. So would you consider striking that term of an agreement in order to improve transparency to the public?
So one, to address General Ford's statement about how tough it is to discipline people. Listen, it's not tough to discipline people. I listened to Captain Splinter from our department. Chief McGrath made statements during some of the protests that we can't do anything. Our hands are tied. They're full of it. We fire people all the time. The union even supports some of these firings. What happens is when our department goes outside the confines of an investigation, much like in the criminal setting. I mean, there's rules for things. If I go into your house illegally and find 10 kilos of cocaine, that cocaine's not going to be admissible. Our department issue is the same. An officer goes in to be questioned about X, and they start saying Y and Z. That's problematic. So the people that make the claims that it's impossible to discipline people, they're full of it. And I'll tell them to their face they're full of it. I have no issue with that. With regards to our contract, so the reason we have it in our contract is for internal discipline, as they use it to progress you as far as using things against you. I know our department maintains a general total file with our officers, even after they leave. The issue for our contract is if, as General Ford talked about, once I had an issue 6 years ago, we say, hey, after 6 years has gone by, whether you've paid your debt to the department or society, that we're not going to keep holding that against you and try and bring that back up. So the reason we have it in the contract is to say, hey, if I get a 40-hour major suspension, it's in my file for 5 years. And if I have another major hiccup, you're going to be able to fire me. And it's going to be really easy. But if I don't, and I go that time, and it's negotiated with the department that that's a good time to say that's enough, that's why it comes out. But it's still noted in their file. I mean, I have officers that get talked to about things that happened to them 10 years ago. We know that it's there. It's just not in their immediate personnel file, as it can be used against discipline to keep progressing them to get rid of them potentially or discipline them more.
So to clarify for Metro and for LVPPA, the expungement of the disciplinary records is only on the personnel side in terms of promotion, but if they were to want to go to another agency in another state who wanted to, they sign a waiver in that new state to pull their disciplinary record, would their full disciplinary history be in that record that the other agency would see, or would the expunged disciplinary actions have been removed?
Probably a better question for Metro. I know if, let's say, I get disciplined today, I get a major suspension, and I say, you know what, I'm going to leave this department and I'm going to go somewhere else. Everything that is in there, this is what I know, everything that's in there is a part of my personnel file, and it doesn't go away just because I left. There's no more 5-year to be expunged from my file once I leave. Once I leave, whatever's in there stays in there, and it doesn't come out. So if I apply somewhere 10 years down the road, the 5-year time that it's in there doesn't apply. That stays in there forever. So as far as a general overall file, probably a better question if Metro keeps one. As we relate and as we deal with it, it's just your personnel file for internal issues that has the expungement period.
Thank you. Mr. Kaplan?
Yeah, from my point of view, we don't want to make an apology for anybody in our unions or our members who are doing anything poorly. And there's a process in place for us in particular. I mean, we have the right to collectively bargain, and we're still waiting a year later for the state to enter into that. So we don't even have a contract with anything that's discussed about. But what we do have is what the state has established long ago is a progressive discipline policy. And it is much like what President Graham has said. It allows the state to, through the due process, to hold employees accountable. And as employees continue to make mistakes, it provides a mechanism to have them released and fired. And that's something that we as a union have never been opposed to. What we are really sticklers on is protecting due process for our officers so that they have a fair and equitable treatment when it comes to whether discipline was approved and appropriate, and the level of that discipline is also appropriate based upon past practices. But when it comes to keeping officers that shouldn't be here, there's a mechanism in place that I found is very effective. There's been several officers at the state level that have been fired this year through the state, and I'm sure that went through the Attorney General's office, that whole process. So I think the process works well. Can it be made better? It can always be fine-tuned. I always think that everything we do can be made better, but I think it's important to protect the due process for employees.
And well, due process is obviously something that should be afforded to everyone when they're being questioned. On a national level, there's been a lot of criticism of Peace Officer Bill of Rights and police union agreements that define how and when an officer can be questioned following any incident like a use of force, an officer-involved shooting, or even an internal complaint investigation. The criticisms largely focus on the perceived special treatment officers are given, as opposed to how officers question civilians in their investigations who are also afforded a certain amount of due process. Specifically, some of the complaints are that an officer is entitled to a cooling off period before being questioned, which is usually at least 48 hours. He must be provided with a certain base amount of information in advance of the questioning, can only be questioned by one person and only with his representative present, and can only be questioned for a reasonable period of time, which is usually not to exceed 4 hours, and with any breaks requested. And so a lot of these terms of these agreements are directly contrary to the DOJ's stated goals of increasing transparency and accountability. And so do you think that any of these policies regarding how an officer is questioned should be changed in order to facilitate the goal of transparency and accountability? Ms. Coward-Holman?
Look at the current times of what we're going through. We have almost completely lost the trust of our communities because of a few bad apples. All cops aren't bad, but all people aren't bad as well. If there is something in place that can better or make our transparency better, why wouldn't we take that? I understand due process, and I understand people looking at us for things that we've done, but if we've done it, we need to own it. And I'm not going to sit and make any excuses to say that, oh yeah, they did this 6 years ago, because if you have a career like most of us do that lasts 20, 25, 30 years, which cops normally do last that long, the pattern can still show that every 5 or 6 years, this officer gets in trouble for doing the same thing. But because it was expunged, it looks as if they didn't do it. But there's a pattern, so we need to consider that as well. I don't want to crucify them, but when you do things, you need to own it and you need to be punished accordingly, because we don't let the public go do things. They're held accountable, and we should be held accountable for our actions as police officers as well. And it should be across the board.
Thank you. Mr. Spratley?
Yeah, clearly, I think things should change. And I know I'm going to ruffle some feathers with my colleagues on this this call here, but things like every single legislative session, there are bills affecting NRS 289 that reduce management's ability to manage employees and provide provisions for the protections of cops. And I was passionate about one particular bill, Senate Bill 242 last session, so much so that I didn't make a lot of friends there at the legislature and even angered a few people. But there are things in that bill, like Section 6, item number 4, they changed it so that a cop under investigation, the representative can have the entire case file ahead of time. My thing, as a law enforcement management person, I just wanted the people under my command to tell the truth. I want to be able to ask them a question and have you answer them truthfully. And that's not the case. So in that section, it says the law enforcement agency conducting the interview, interrogation, or hearing shall allow a representative of the peace officer to inspect the following: physical evidence, audio recordings, photographs, and video recordings, and statements made by or attributed to the police officer. So you have a citizen who's writing a statement against some bad behavior of an officer, and we have to then, if we're doing an investigation, provide that to the bad cop so he knows who wrote the statement, what they said about him. So people are scared to come forward. That's not transparency. And I argued passionately at the legislature against that bill, yet it still moved forward with flying colors, I'll put it that way. And shame on the legislators that voted for that bill, even though I was passionate then, and I could feel my neck getting red right now. I'm passionate about that bill right now because I told you, this only protects bad cops. We don't want bad cops. And so now here you are, and you're going to want to make some reforms in a couple weeks of the special session. Reform that bill, because that was a bad one, and I told you about it.
Mr. McCann?
Wow. I remember those days, Eric. Thank you. I was sitting right behind you. I would remind you that for some period of time, officers have been allowed to see the entire file after they were recommended for discipline anyway. So I don't know that I'm in agreement with Eric that it causes any kind of a chilling effect on people coming forward and making any kind of an accusation or allegation. Certainly the internal affairs and the OPRs of this state are seemingly working overtime to get things out these days. One thing I want to bring to everybody's attention, we all know it here, I think, is that I keep hearing a lot of rhetoric about cops are, because of unions, because of, well, our 289 rights, for example, are allowed to get away with criminal matters and are being, fostered through the system more than most. I have to remind people that our Peace Officer Bill of Rights, NRS 289, expressly states that some of these protections that people complain about in terms of the criminal system, they're not applicable in criminal investigations. 289.090 specifically says that many of the due process rights that a lot of people feel we have that are superior over that of citizens would ultimately follow them to the criminal investigative process. That is not true by our own Peace Officer Bill of Rights, and we all here know that. Certainly under Garrity, we're required to give statements if we're compelled to do so by the departments, and the departments usually compel those statements. I get a lot of cops, not a lot, I get some cops who unfortunately put themselves in bad positions because their truthfulness is being questioned. That's unfortunate for them. Sometimes it is not true. But at least my docket of things that I'm working on would not suggest that cops are just floating through the system doing whatever they want to do. They are being held accountable. I would suggest in some of my organizations, if not all, they're being held even more accountable. There is greater scrutiny, to the point where some officers feel they're going to work and they're doing great things and not even being given a pat on the back for doing the great things they're doing. It's almost like they're coming to work as though they're waiting for somebody to scrutinize them to the point of finding fault. Quite frankly, I think that causes people to be less interested in doing more work and maybe less interested in calling upon their brethren to do the right thing, because I was told by a cop, and not everybody on this dais may very well agree, I was told by a cop 20 years ago, big arrests sometimes equal big problems. Medium arrests equal medium problems. No arrests equal no problems. I'm not suggesting cops are out there making no arrests. I'm just saying that they get to a point after a while where they're thinking, where am I going with this in my career? I signed on to do a job. And if I do a bad job, they should be held accountable. And those of us who are on here who represent officers can attest to the fact that we're busy. And we got people who are being held accountable, and some of them are getting fired. And some of them should be fired.
Thank you. And Mr. Kaplan? You're still muted.
Sorry about that. I think Mr. McCann hit a lot of my points, but I do want to reiterate there seems to be an assumption, and that's the thing that we really have to fight, that there is a sense that we want to protect each other, and that we're all looking out for each other to protect the bad cops. Everyone I work with, everyone in this call, we all have the highest standards for ourselves and for the agencies we work for. And we all are actually quite the opposite. We're all working hard to make sure that those who don't represent what we signed up for are not part of this profession anymore. And I think that's the crux of this issue that we're talking about, is where we stand and who we are essentially. And I want to make a point that to humanize us. I mean, I'm just a person like everyone else out there. And I chose to go into law enforcement because I wanted to protect my community, be part of, and find a way to serve others, a higher calling, so to speak. Some people choose to be pastors, priests, firefighters, and I chose to go into law enforcement to do good. And everyone I work with has that same feeling. And those that don't act like that in our profession, we want gone just as much as anybody else does. And so there is no sense, I think, of us looking to protect people. These processes in place that you're talking about, I think we are at a higher standard. As Mr. McCann stated, we do have to give statements. We don't get to wait and plead the fifth. We do have to make statements about what happened. But we're afforded a few benefits that the legislature of the state of Nevada found necessary to pass the Peace Officer Bill of Rights in the first place years ago. And so I think the process in place as it is an excellent one. Again, I'll be the first to say that things can always be tweaked and we can always find a better way to do things as society changes. But I think we are doing very well in that aspect as we stand right now.
Thank you.
Mr.
General
Grammis, I'm going to turn to you. I'm going to turn to you, Mr. Grammis, so you can make your statement here, but also want you to go ahead and utilize this as an opportunity for your closing remarks. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We are already beyond 3 o'clock, but this has been a great conversation. I think the public wanted to hear it, and there are more opportunities for us to continue working together to try to go trust. So with that, let me go to Steve, and then we will circle back around with everyone for a 30-second to a minute-long closing out, and then we'll be done. Mr. Grammis.
All right, sir. First of all, yeah, thank you. This was really cool. Probably better than I thought it was going to be. I'll just address Mr. Spratley. Listen, there's people in management right now that, because of the protections that were afforded them when they were troops, are still on this agency and are leading agency. So the thought of, it's bad cop, bad cop, bad cop, it's due process. Everybody gets it, and they should. The thought of, the cooling off period for interviews, there's science behind why we want that, because we want a full encapsulation of what they can remember. The 2 sleep cycles is important for somebody involved in a traumatic incident, that they should have that time. But, with regards to everybody's issues collectively, we'll no doubt in maybe a week, maybe Mr. Ford, you could fill us in on when this special session is going to start. But hopefully we can be a part of the conversation up there and not just kind of directed. We want what the community wants. I think this panel, everyone here, when we saw what that, and I cursed a lot, I'm not going to curse right now, but that a-hole in Minnesota, what he did, sitting there for 8+ minutes, sickened everybody in our profession. And it's something that none of us can understand or sympathize with. It's disgusting. We have incidents like that are just disgusting to our profession. I was quoted in a media piece where I said that officers that do wrong, I'll throw them out of the 2nd-story window of my building. It's not if they do wrong, but when they violate the trust of our oath of what we chose to do. When you're an officer stopping ladies and fondling their breasts because you got some mental problems, that's the guy I'll throw out the 2nd-story window. We ain't here to protect horrible people. We're not here to protect people that violate the public's trust. Do we defend people? Sure. Mr. Ford, you can appreciate defending folks, right? But we are all in the same boat, that we want to identify these bad seeds, and we'd love to get rid of them as quick as we can. Some of us are even passionate about getting rid of those bad folks. So thank you. Teresa, you did a good job. Mr. Ford, good job. Everybody on the panel, thank you all. Regina, you look as lovely as the day you retired. And this was really fun for me. Thank you all.
All right, thank you. And so we'll go through for final thoughts. We'll start with Ms. Coward-Holman.
Thank everybody for sitting on this panel. It was informative, and I'm sure the community can appreciate this. And I'm just gonna, I wanna just say to everybody to make your voice count, stand for the right thing, don't do shortcuts. This goes for the community as well. When you see something that's wrong, say it's wrong. If somebody's doing something good, then applaud them and say it's good. We are definitely living in uncharted times, and things are different, and we're moving. And I just say that if we don't move with the community and the people around us, we will always play catch up. As the community moves, we need to move. We need to always be in front of the community, with the community, and making sure our community is strong. We need to stop seeing color as something that we look down upon, but we need to embrace the diversity that our city is made of, our state and our world is made of, and we need to make every strive to do the right thing when we can. And when we don't do the right thing, we need to be held accountable for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McCann?
Once again, thank you for the panel. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, General Ford. I want to echo General Ford's comments when he first started. I don't always do that, Erin, but you said you wanted to augment or restore or create trust. Yes, yes, and yes. Now I'm going to quote Steve Ramos. If you're in a position as a union leader and you don't agree with some of these agree to embrace some of these reforms, things that will help your department and help your officers to weed out the bad and keep the good, then you're in the wrong position. I think that's kind of what Steve said earlier. And I agree 100%. So I guess I'm not an apologist for the bad guys out there, bad ladies out there, but I am absolutely a champion for the good ones, and they far outreach it. And one last thing, Nevada is not Minneapolis. It is not some of these other areas. But I'm not glad it happened, but I'm glad we're talking after that, because this is a fruitful conversation. Let's make sure the fruitfulness of this conversation, the depth of the conversation, continues at the special session, continues at the general session next year, and we don't respond to knee-jerk reactions. We are a fine group of people in the state of Nevada. We can be better, and we will be better. And this is a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kaplan?
Hello, everyone. I want to thank everyone on the panel, and especially Attorney General Ford for inviting me to represent the Nevada Police Union. And I want to just speak to the public right now and tell you that I, as the president, and our members and police officers in general that we represent, we're listening to your critiques. And we're listening with the intent to understand. We want to understand what your grievances are, what you want our society and what you want policing to be, and with the intent that we can move the bar forward. I will say with absolute certainty that we're doing a great job as police officers, but I also say, like with anything else in this world, we can always do better. And as we listen to understand you, we're thinking about ways that we can continue to push forward and be better. And I would say to our department management, hopefully you're listening now too, and those politicians at the legislature, I ask you to be leaders. I ask you to do the required things necessary to properly fund us so that we can achieve the goals that the public wants us to achieve in a way that will meet the needs of the public and also allow us as law enforcement officers to withhold and uphold our integrity and to do our job the way we signed off to do when we first signed up and took the oath of office. So again, thank you for everyone's time. This has been a great time for me to participate.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Hernandez?
Was that for me? Hello?
Yep.
I think it broke up a little. My phone broke up a little bit. I apologize. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invite. It was extremely for me, very valuable. The feedback was amazing and very informative. I sat back and I listened to everyone, and I made a lot of mental notes. It was fantastic. I'd like to just take the opportunity to speak to the public that's perhaps watching this. Couple things. Number one is the importance of, we were talking about community policing. You know, I agree with everyone. It's such an important component of policing. And so with that, let's take the opportunity to get involved. You know, the community, get involved with us and let us know what your concerns are. Let's be part of the collective solution, because any community policing or any policing strategy should have the community's voice built into it, because we don't want to develop a policing strategy that doesn't quite fit what the community is looking for. So with that, I encourage you to get involved. I encourage you to get educated. Allow us to come into your homes or come into your places of where you congregate, and let us share some of our agency's processes, our practices. I found that when people learn about what it is that we do and how we do it, it opens a whole new door to communication and a better understanding for the law enforcement profession. So again, thank you very much. I think this is a great opportunity for the community to get involved, and let's keep it going. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gramis?
You don't want me talking again, do you? I monopolize all the time. No,
Keep it brief.
Just to echo, yeah, listen, to the community, the folks that are watching, pretty much everyone on this panel is accessible to you all as well. I get emails and Facebook Messenger stuff from folks in the community all the time. If you want to hit us up and say, hey, I got an issue with this or issue with that, let us know. And we're willing to try and have that conversation and try and make our community better. You know, like everyone said, we can get better. I think we're doing a really good job. But you know, when you need us, you guys as well, give us a call. But again, thank you all. It was a good time.
Thank you. Mr. Spratley?
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you to all these professionals on this this call. And they're just saying amazing words and things that we agree with completely. You know, the Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs represent management of law enforcement agencies. They represent leadership in law enforcement agencies, and we can't do that without knowing what the communities that they serve how they want our leaders to lead. So you can certainly reach out to me at Eric at nvsca.com. Go to the nvsca.com website, see what we have to offer there, but then get a hold of me and I can connect you with your agency leader in your area. I did want to talk about you know, the things that have brought us here. The actions of one officer do not reflect the hard work and dedication of law enforcement to the protections of civil rights in this country. One cop, several cops don't reflect the hard work of all the cops in your area. While some may never understand the operational requirements of law and history, we owe it to our officers on the street to provide clarity and to assist them in their decision-making, to promote confidence and provide our support to those officers on the street. I ask all of you to reconsider reactive responses, especially at the legislature, as they are only undermining law enforcement's history of hard work and dedication to this country and to the people of the state of Nevada. So rather than knee-jerk reactions, let's have productive conversations like we're doing here. Engage us in conversations, hear what we have to say, and we'll craft good public policy that's good for people, good for agencies, and good for the cops on the street. So thank you, General Ford, for having the Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs be a part of this discussion, and I look forward to working with you for good public policy in the future.
Thank you. And the last word is yours, General Ford.
Thank you. So again, thanks everybody for jumping on. This is a very important part of the conversation, part of the progress toward improving relationships between law enforcement and the communities they serve. This isn't political. Listen, I'm going to show a vulnerability as we exit out. I love police. I respect police. And I think I've proven that over the course of my political career, for example, by being the ones pushing the green button to protect your right to bargain, to protect your right to have a pension, to protect your right to have presumptions on certain healthcare issues. I've demonstrated the advocacy that I have for police officers by responding to the call for a hate crime of sorts when people target you. That's on the one side. The other side is I, in my capacity as Attorney General and as also as a Black man, view this as existential. For both police officers, and I pray for Shay on a daily basis, but also for the communities in which we serve, because when bad decisions are made in the street, people die, and we have seen that. And so, for example, when I was asked during the campaign cycle why the endorsement of the union, the coalition union, would be important to me, I said that. I said because I think you know me, and you know that I will support you where it's appropriate, and that I will hold you accountable where it is not. And I only mention that to say I didn't get the coalition's endorsement. I did get an endorsement from a particular union, but not the coalition's endorsement. Only to say this isn't political for me. I've put these programs are purposefully designed to elicit opportunities for us to move forward with concrete policies, not politically oriented. And I will continue to advocate for the cops doing the 99.9% of the cops that are doing a great job on the street, but we'll continue to hold accountable that 0.1% that is not. And thank you all for joining me in this particular endeavor. No one hates a bad cop worse than a good cop, and that's what everybody says. So thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to working with you in the legislative session. No knee-jerk reactions here. We've been working on this, and we'll continue to work on crafting good policy in that regard. So thank you again, everybody on the panel. For the watching audience and listening audience, please tune in next Sunday at 2 o'clock, where we're going to have actual individuals and organizations that represent individuals who will also give us suggestions on ways to improve relationships between law enforcement and the communities in which they serve. So thank you so much again for having on, Teresa. Another great job. Thank you, everybody. You're not done.